Good. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another Sunbelt Spotlight. Today's guest is Mark Jorgensen with his wonderful book on Bighorn sheep, Desert Bighorn sheep, the wilderness icon. In fact, I'd like to show you the book, and I'll be telling you a little bit about that. And Mark, in just a minute, this is a book that is absolutely amazing because it is the ultimate guide to desert bighorn sheep. It's the most comprehensive photographic work ever published on desert bighorn. Mark is the author of the book. The photographer is Jeff Young, and together both Mark and Jeff have spent over 50 years studying desert bighorn sheep and photographing them. So it is the ultimate book if you do want to learn about the bighorn sheep, not only of Anza-Borrego, but of our Southwest and of Northern Baja, California. So let me tell you a little bit about our speaker in just a minute. I do want to let you know that there is a chat button down at the bottom. And if you have questions during Mark's presentation, be sure to jot them down and Mark will be able to answer those questions afterwards. This is part of a series that we have on Sunbelt Spotlight. If you should miss part of it, or if you know somebody who failed to sign up and would really like to hear Mark's talk, it is being recorded. And in a few days after the talk, it will be posted on our website page and also on our new YouTube page. So this will be there and you can always refer back to it and listen to the talk then. Also want to mention that Mark's book, whenever we have a Sunbelt Spotlight, whoever the author is, and today it is Mark, that it is discounted. If you will go to our website, you will see a special discounted price where you can order that book in case you are interested in obtaining a copy of the book. Also, I'd like to let you know a little bit about Mark before he begins his talk. I met Mark, it must have been over 50 years ago, before he was even part of the state park, when I was working on my master's thesis on Anza-Borrego Desert State Park, and have known Mark for over 50 years. He's just an absolutely amazing person. He began his studies on bighorn sheep as a teenager, and today and he's continued it into his retirement. His 36 years with California State Parks, he served as a ranger, a naturalist, resource ecologist, and finally a superintendent of Anza-Borrego Desert State Park. He is a member of the technical staff of the Desert Bighorn Council and is an advisor to the Bighorn Institute. He presents educational programs about desert bighorn sheep throughout the western states and has worked to establish desert parks in Mongolia, United Arab Emirates, and Saudi Arabia. He's also given scientific presentations on state park resource management in Israel. He's quite a talented man and a delight, and you will just enjoy his talk. I know you will, because he's just one fantastic speaker. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Mark Jorgensen. Mark, take it away. Let's see your program.
I'm sure that was an illustrious introduction. I couldn't hear a word of it because of some technical difficulties, but I'm assuming that everyone on the program can hear me now, and I would like to welcome you. Really appreciate your time this afternoon, and I hope we have a good presentation and that you're able to get your questions answered at the end, and we will proceed. Diana, I'm sure, talked a little bit about the origin of the book that Jeff and I met out in Anza-Borrego, and Jeff had accumulated about 60,000 images and came into my office while I was the park superintendent and showed me his portfolio. And the first picture I saw was the cover photo of the book, this portrait of a ram and beautiful curved horns. And so I said to Jeff, these photos are like none that I have ever seen in the thousands and thousands of bighorn sheep pictures I've seen. And I said, you ought to do a book. So he said, okay, you write it and I'll produce all the photos. So we selected a couple hundred out of his collection of 60,000. This was back in 2013. And I'm sure he has 80 or 100,000 pictures by now. So the book was produced by Diana and Lowell at Sunbelt, and it's been distributed around the western states at national park visitor centers and state parks and bookstores. And eternally grateful to the skills of Jeff Young. I think if you take a look at the book, and almost all of the images in this program today are due to the skill of Jeff and his patience out in the field. Bighorn sheep are found in the western United States and northern Mexico and southern Canada. The group that we call Bighorn sheep is actually comprised of about 7 distinct subspecies that scientists have delineated. There are 2 subspecies in Baja California and 1 on the mainland of Mexico, which is interesting because it was completely extirpated from the state of Texas, the states of Nuevo Leon, Coahuila, and Chihuahua. And now through successful reintroduction and conservation programs, that subspecies, Ovis canadensis mexicana, has really made a miraculous recovery. There were 0 in Texas and those 3 northern Mexican states, and now there are actually thousands of that subspecies. What we have here at in our local desert in Anza-Borrego is considered the Nelson's bighorn sheep. Up into Colorado, Wyoming, Montana, and parts of Canada, we have the Rocky Mountain bighorn sheep. That bronze area of the Sierra Nevada is called the Sierra bighorn, and it's quite different, distinct from the others. And then up in northern Nevada, Idaho, Oregon, Washington, up into British Columbia and Alberta is the California bighorn, which you can see is no longer found in California due to diseases and livestock grazing, things like that. So the desert bighorn as a group covers about 4 distinct desert environments in North America. The Chihuahuan Desert in northern Mexico, Texas, southern New Mexico. The Sonoran Desert, which our local Anza-Borrego Desert and the Colorado Desert are a subunit of the Sonoran Desert. And of course, the state of Sonora, Mexico, and southern Arizona. The Mojave Desert, which is a little higher elevation, colder desert, receives snowfall and quite a bit more rain than most of the Colorado Desert does. Extends up into Nevada and southern Utah, eastern California, and then the Great Basin Desert, the Red Rock country of southwest Colorado, Utah, Grand Canyon of northern Arizona. And these animals have developed genetically, have evolved to fit their niche, to fit their ecosystem and the challenges that those ecosystems pose, whether it's low elevation desert below sea level or high elevation mountainous areas like the White Mountains of California, where they range to over 13,000 feet, almost 14,000 feet. You might wonder where our desert bighorn came from. Have they been here for millions of years, along with horses and camels and mastodons, or were they late arrivals? And the answer is they came from Asia and migrated into North America. They arose in the Middle East and up into Central Asia and Siberia, and they moved eastward across the land bridge into North America. This is an Argali sheep that is at Anza-Borrego's sister park in central Mongolia in the Gobi Desert. The Argali sheep is more like a pronghorn antelope sometimes, in that it will get out into the open steppe country and just cover miles and miles when danger is detected. And it lives along with Siberian ibex, which tend to hang out in this even steeper rocky country, more like our bighorn sheep in North America do today. Bighorn and Argali, all the wild sheep, have always been a point of fascination by humans going back many thousands of years. And even today, I think all of us on the program today probably are excited when we see a bighorn, or we're still searching for our first ones. And so it's a real point of interest to all of us. Prehistoric people used bighorn and Argali for many things. They used the horns, they made tools, they stacked horns and skulls in large piles for religious purposes. They revered them. They used the meat and the hide, the bone, for any number of reasons. And it's one of the most prolific rock art motifs found in the Mojave Desert. Out around the Coso Mountains, there are tens of thousands of bighorn sheep motifs found on the rock walls. And at our sister park in the Gobi Desert, we find rock art, also petroglyphs, that actually look like they were created by the same artists that created the ones in the Mojave Desert. So rock art is prolific in both places, and it's pretty fascinating to see the similarities between the old world and new world. Both sexes of bighorn sheep, the male, large rams, have horns, and we'll talk about how the rams use their horns for dominance. And as you can see, this guy's pretty scarred up. They use their horns in head-to-head combat with other rams in battle to establish dominance. And the females also have horns. So some animals like elk and white-tailed deer, mule deer, don't have antlers in the females, and only the males do. But in the sheep and goats, very often both sexes have horns. They find them quite useful for gaining access to food in a desert environment where everything has thorns and spines. They can use them to bash in the tops of cactus and gain access. They also use them to protect themselves from predators and to protect their young. Lambs are born in the spring of the year to coincide with the first spring green up. And the females, the ewes, are very faithful mothers. They carry the lamb for 6 months in gestation from the mating period in late summer until birth, usually in February or March in our area. Bighorn in the northern climes in Montana and Alberta might give birth in late May, early June. But in our area, the lamb's birthing coincides with that first green up. It gives these animals the best chance of survival. The mother can produce good quantities of milk during our spring wildflower season and green up. But as you know, by June, July, the greenery is mostly gone, especially in the grasses and the annuals. So these lambs need to get up and be healthy and somewhat self-sufficient by the time the mother's milk dries up in early summer. So about 80 to 90% of females do become successfully impregnated and carry lambs during their gestation period. And unfortunately for the species, they only give birth to a single lamb. Twins are extremely rare, unlike deer, elk, antelope, which usually give birth to twins and sometimes even triplets, which means a low population of mule deer or antelope may be able to rebound quite rapidly over 3 or 4 years. Bighorn sheep giving birth to a single lamb means that they only have one chance a year. And unfortunately, lamb survival across bighorn sheep populations is often quite low. If 40 or 50% of the lambs born in the spring could survive through their first year, things would look pretty good for bighorn populations. But it's very common that maybe only 15 or 20% of the lambs might survive their first year. When they do give birth and their lambs are aplenty out there on the hillsides, the females will usually gather up in groups. There's safety in numbers. And it's not rare to see 5 or 10 lambs together, maybe with one elder ewe as a babysitter, giving the females a chance to go catch up on their feeding and get a little peace and quiet up on the hillsides for the day. But can you imagine if you're a mother looking at your lamb up there on the steep cliffs like this, 30 or 40-foot cliff? It's not very relaxing to think that, oh yeah, they're in good hands. They have a babysitter. And indeed, accidental falls are one of the leading causes of death in the first 6 to 12 months of life, followed by malnutrition, dehydration. Mostly, though, is respiratory diseases, and we'll talk about those. The sheep are supremely adapted to steep mountain terrain. They're the conformation of the body, the strength of their bones and muscle, and the adaptation of their hooves is all set up for life in very steep terrain, whether it's jumping off 8 or 10-foot boulders and landing very hard, or the ability to scale very steep cliffs. You can imagine as a human trying to make it up this 20 or 30-foot, very loosely comprised cliff face. And here a mature ewe just decides she's going to get away from the human photographer intruder, and she's going to get up this cliff and away from danger. There aren't very many predators that can follow her up that straight, loose face. And indeed, they spend an awful lot of time in very steep terrain. Sheep biologists call this escape terrain, and it's the safest place in the world for bighorn sheep. When they have to come down to the lower areas, the flat canyon bottoms and the alluvial fans for food or water, it's one of the more dangerous things that they do in their life. And that's where predators hang out, and humans are most likely to be encountered. And so it's not uncommon for us to find the lambs that do die in the first few months of life down in the canyon bottoms. They may be subjected to bacteria and all that's introduced from domestic livestock into the mountain range. Some of these persist in the sheep population for years and cause low lamb survivorship. A lamb goes down in the bottom, has a respiratory problem, dies of pneumonia, and then is usually quickly fed on by scavengers, predators, or is stalked and killed by any number of predators as well. Mountain lions are the #1 predator in our desert, followed by coyotes. Coyotes usually are unable to kill a mature animal. They can, but more often they're going to prey on what appear to be sick lambs. Now, this mountain lion, as you can see, is standing next to a large ram that he killed. And then the researchers placed a surveillance camera there at the kill site that ram had a radio telemetry collar on, and when that collar doesn't move for about 4 hours, it tells the researcher that that animal is probably dead. So they will go and locate that and try to determine the cause of death, whether it's natural or a fall, or maybe fell prey to a predator. So coyotes, as I said, very often lurk down near water in the thickets, in the willows and arrowweed, and down in the palm groves, and they watch the hillsides for groups of sheep. And what does a sick bighorn look like? If you're a coyote or mountain lion, you become expert on the prey and what normal behavior looks like, and what an animal looks like when it has a broken leg or a respiratory problem, and a cough. And in the case of bighorn lambs, it becomes pretty obvious when one is sick. They really get debilitated. And as you can see, ribs, hips, the pelage doesn't look healthy. The ears are not erect like they normally would be. They tend to droop and sag, and the mouth is open, the tongue is hanging out, the nose is runny, the eyes are runny. So this animal pictured here probably is going to be dying of pneumonia within a couple of days. The coyote is going to really focus on that animal. When it comes down to water with the rest of the sheep herd, the coyotes will let them get down into the water area, and then they may give chase. And we've witnessed this a few times where they will chase the entire herd, and the healthy animals are able to get up the mountaintop in this escape terrain, and the compromised animal that's having trouble breathing lags behind. The coyotes work often as a team, 2 or 3 of them, and they cut that animal out, and they can kill it pretty fast. So probably the #1 cause of the major sheep decline in North America in the 1800s is traced back to domestic livestock. Imagine cattle, domestic sheep, domestic goats coming into the West, especially during the gold rush. It was documented at one river crossing down at Yuma that 500,000 domestic sheep crossed the Colorado River and came through the Southern Immigrant Trail through southern Anza-Borrego. And those sheep brought any number of viruses and bacteria along with them, and probably caused the demise. I would estimate hundreds of thousands of native bighorn probably died of disease with the advent of domestic livestock being brought into the Southwest. Combine that with mining activities, cattle grazing, the establishment of ranches, the need for camp meat. People were traveling into the Southwest in wagon trains and establishing camps in small towns. Hunters would go out and shoot bighorn sheep and deer and elk and moose, whatever they could to provide food for the newcomers. So domestic sheep are the nemesis of native bighorn sheep. And you may see this in the news frequently, of conflicts between wool growers and wildlife biologists. We are trying desperately throughout the West to segregate domestic sheep grazing from native bighorn sheep populations. All it takes is one sheep making nose-to-nose contact with a bighorn, and we've seen it time and time again where entire population of bighorn sheep die out within a month or 2 of making contact. So this is one adaptation the native bighorn do not seem to have immunity to. Some of them often will survive in a population, and they have created some antibodies, as we're seeing in our own population today with the pandemic. It doesn't kill everybody, but it kills an awful lot. So segregation of these two types of animals is really the only solution. Other adaptations that desert bighorn have, all bighorn, they've evolved with a superb digestive system that can take what looks like useless brown dried grass and dried shrubbery and extract nutrition and moisture out of it. During the wintertime, bighorn are able to extract moisture out of the greenery and the vegetation. We have some mountain ranges that we feel bighorn probably do not have access to free water for as long as 7 months out of the year. And then during the hot months, they move back into the canyons that have year-round reliable water sources. Their digestive system is comprised of basically 4 chambers of digestion. And the first one gives them their name as a ruminant. And that organ is the rumen. And the rumen is a large fermentation vat, and food is gathered rather hurriedly when the animals down in the canyon bottoms or up on the slopes. They eat pretty fast, and they just bring that in and swallow it pretty rapidly. And then they retreat to the escape terrain, and they go up and scrape out a little bed, and they lay down, and then the animal brings that unchewed food back up into its mouth, and then it goes through the chewing motion known as chewing the cud. So the cud is the undigested, unchewed food material that was gathered during that morning's feeding bout. And then they will sit quietly in a safe spot where they can watch out for predators, and they will chew the cud and they will swallow it again. And the plant cells that have been properly crushed will no longer float in the rumen. They will sink, and they will go down to the next chamber of digestion. And then finally, all this chewed up, digested food material goes into the large intestine, where almost all the moisture is extracted. And all that's left as waste product is a tiny little pellet. So as you walk up, say, the Borrego Palm Canyon Trail, or you're out in Joshua Tree going to Barker Dam, you look down on the ground, there are all these dark pellets. And you pick them up, and very rarely does it feel like they have any moisture at all, because they have been run through this process, the nutrients and almost all the moisture extracted from them. So the sheep is not wasting any energy, any food or any moisture, and they can extract what they need out of, say, a lonely ocotillo flower on a leafless ocotillo branch. They may successfully crush the top of a barrel cactus with their horns and be able to get into that pulpy material. It's like a gigantic potato. And a ram or a group of rams, we will, over a period of days, will work 3 or 4 foot tall barrel cactus right down to the ground. And all that will remain is a ring of cactus spines and a ring of sheep pellets. Another ram might come along and challenge this one to his barrel cactus feast, and there may be a little head-to-head combat or some horning or kicking. And rarely will you see a ram just move aside and let the females or the lambs come in and share the barrel cactus. By far the most dangerous pursuit that a sheep does during a summer day is come down off the steep terrain and go down to the side of a stream to get water, because this is where the predators are lurking in the in the thickets down in the riparian areas. The coyotes and the mountain lions can be very patient and wait for the animals to come to them. And then they will give chase, as we mentioned before. So as you can see, there are a lot of eyes. I think when this picture was taken, there were about 25 bighorn at water at the same time. And very often one is kind of standing vigilantly up on the rocks overlooking the others, and will alert them if danger arrives. And when sheep are down at water like that and they hear animals fleeing rapidly and they hear hoof falls on the rocks, they will just turn and run. They don't stand around and wait to see what the danger is. So if a flock of quail come out of the bushes, all the sheep will run up the hill and they'll wait, and then they'll gradually walk back down. If it's a coyote, they're going to go into the steep terrain and they won't stop until they get way up and can look back down. Eyesight is excellent in bighorn sheep. If you read most books, the authors will come up with some figure like bighorn eyesight is equal to a 7-power binocular. I often wondered, how did they figure that out? And in reality, they did not figure it out. It's just a guess. And as any of you know who have been out searching for bighorn sheep or have taken part in our annual 4th of July sheep count, usually when you spot a bighorn and you pull your binoculars up and you're looking at this animal a half mile away, very often it's already seen you long ago and it's staring right at you. So this tells us their eyesight is excellent. They can see movement. They see things that are out of place. They might get used to folks walking on a trail or cars driving on a highway. But if somebody's off the trail or a car stops and somebody climbs up a cliff, then they're on full alert. We talked about the use of the horns, and among rams, they very often use their horns to establish dominance with one another. So you may see 2 or 3 or even 10 rams together, and you can tell by the way they're all scarred up and chipped and broken horns that there has been some fighting going on. And once that dominance is established, that very often the fighting is over. They certainly don't need to get injured or get a broken leg. Might spell the end of life for an animal that depends on getting around in the steep country. So a lot of times a ram will just show off. It won't have to do head-to-head combat, but it may throw its head back and give maximum show of its big horns. Its eyes bug out, the nostrils flare. You can see the large patch in front of the eye is called a preorbital gland, and that gland exudes a waxy material that is unique to that animal. So it has a distinct odor, and it'll rub that preorbital gland on other rams, on their horns. It'll rub it on tree trunks and rocks and females. And everybody knows that the big bad ram was there, and he leaves his calling card. Rams exhibit a lot of strange behavior, especially after midsummer, which is the breeding season, and the hormones start flowing in the males and the females during this rut period or breeding season. So every time I give a program and I show this ram is completely off the ground, and Jeff Young, being the superb photographer he is, would often get pictures of sheep when they leap from one boulder to another. This one here just exhibited very unusual behavior, and I can't really explain what is going through this ram's head. I can say he's running on hormones and he's being rambunctious. But it really doesn't serve any purpose. And the other sheep there are like staring at him like, what the heck? What's going on here? I have to do that when I grow up. So during the rut, there's a lot of interesting behavior, and rams will be chasing females relentlessly. Very often they'll come down into the canyon bottoms, Borrego Palm Canyon, the trailhead, excellent places during August, September to see breeding behavior, rams pursuing females. The interesting thing about the female and her being receptive to breeding is she is only acceptable or accepting breeding biologically in about a 48, 72-hour period. When she goes out of that estrus or heat period, she may no longer be biologically receptive. So these rams will sniff and check her hormone scent, and when they detect that she's ready to be bred, they will be on her like this group. Jeff entitled this photo "Undivided Attention." So you got 4 monster rams. Probably only one is going to be able to breed with her on this day. And she may go ahead and run and run and run, and then they may just give up. It's 110, 115 degrees. They may just go lay down. And very often she will come back and get up on a boulder where they can see her. And then the chase will commence again. If they cannot decide among themselves who the dominant ram is and who's going after this female, there may be a head-to-head battle. And sometimes these battles last for an hour or so. We've seen them where there were groups of rams, 6 or 8 rams, and there was a head-to-head battle about every 15 seconds for a couple of hours. And finally somebody gives up and says, okay, you know, you're the champ. I will step aside and I won't challenge you till next year. So the dominant ram most often gets a chance to breed the females. The ewe will very often go squat and urinate on a boulder or an open piece of sand, and the ram will take a sniff of that, and he does like a field chemical test, and tells him if she is in fact receptive or not. And if she is, then he will continue to pursue her. And you know, if he's fortunate, he'll get a chance to breed with the female. The whole breeding bout only lasts about 10 seconds, 15 seconds, something like that. If she's successfully impregnated, this may occur like in August or September, then she will carry that developing lamb for about 6 months until birthing time in February or March, which we said, you know, as far as evolution and how everything works out, the timing of that lamb being born in a desert environment, the most success is going to be found when the peak green up happens in the spring. And then that lamb can put on good growth. The female can produce a lot of milk, and hopefully they're successful and that lamb survives. So over the years, bighorn populations, as we mentioned, declined very dramatically in the 1800s with the introduction of livestock and diseases, the encroachment of humans throughout the West. And that happens and continues on today, where bighorn habitat is infringed upon by housing developments and golf courses and highways and power lines and you know, solar developments and wind generator fields. So it's really important for conservation efforts to work on large scale conservation in preserves, parks, critical habitat set up for endangered species, and any number of resource management projects may work together to help restore bighorn habitat and to fend off things like exotic animals like wild horses and feral burros, feral cattle, feral goats, water sources that have been taken away from wildlife by human activities, all the way back to the gold rush when cabins were built next to desert springs and springs were piped off to feed cattle operations and agriculture, and overdrafting of groundwater. So in many places around the West, land managers have created wildlife drinking stations, or wildlife guzzlers, we call them. We collect rainwater on these large plastic aprons, and it flows downhill into a little dam, into a pipe system, and it is stored in very large plastic tanks, which we attempt to camouflage. We paint them to protect them from UV breakdown, and so you can't see them from, you know, a long distance or from the air very well. So there's 5,000 gallons of water that's available to wildlife in an area where the natural springs have been usurped by human activity. In the center of the photo, lower center, you see a metal box, and that is a drinking tank, and the drinker has about a 1 square foot surface area that the water is exposed to, reduces evaporation, and that box has a float system in it. So the bighorn, the deer, the coyotes, whoever happens to come and get a drink will drink that water down, and then the float valve opens up and replenishes the water from the tank. So Anza-Borrego Desert State Park has 10 of these guzzler systems. Last winter was a really bad drought, less than 2 inches of rain, and due to mechanical malfunction in the guzzlers and overuse by sheep, 2 of them got dried up completely. And we actually researchers found 4 dead sheep adjacent to one of the dried guzzlers in September of 2020. So this last summer, to try to avert that, they worked with the U.S. Marine Corps and California Department of Fish and Wildlife, were able to actually airlift water into one of those guzzlers in the Vallecito Mountains. And we're hoping this upcoming spring we'll be able to make that happen again with some aerial delivery of water and make sure that each of the guzzlers have sufficient water to get bighorn through the summer. In the Vallecito Mountains, over the years, we documented only about 25 or 30 bighorn in a 100,000 acre mountain range. And after the installation of 6 of these guzzlers to replace historic waters that were taken away, we now document about 150 to 180 bighorn in that same range. We've also been removing exotic plants like the tamarisk tree, which is a heavy user of water at desert water sources. We've been killing tamarisk trees since the early 1970s, and we've treated about 180 miles of water courses, streams, and canyons. And it's pretty amazing to remove 50 or 100 of these trees from around a little meager spring, and within a week you see that the water is really flowing again. So it's a vital resource management tool. Reduction of tamarisk, it's a problem throughout the western United States. Today we hear a lot about green energy and alternative energy sources, and indeed we do need to get away from petroleum products and the use of oil and coal and other very impactful sources of energy. And so wind generation has really taken a hold throughout the world, and so have solar projects. The problem can be that if those projects are put in the wrong places. And one of the wrong places for wind generators and the resultant power lines associated with them would be a bighorn lambing area, like down in the south end of Anza-Borrego around the town of Ocotillo. There were 117 wind turbines built in the about 10 years ago, and the federal government allowed the installation of wind turbines and power towers right in the middle of a lambing area where we know that 6 ewes would give birth to 6 lambs each spring. So there's a direct impact. Now, this wind generation plant is 100 miles away from where the energy is going to be used in San Diego. So doesn't it make sense maybe to generate electricity on rooftop solar or even wind closer to the source of where this power is going to be used and consumed by 3 million people? So what's taken place is put these things out in remote deserts, and they fast track the environmental reviews, or they completely exempt environmental reviews, and they put these programs right in the middle of bighorn habitat or desert tortoise habitat. They block movement corridors, and so these things need to be thought out in a much better fashion than they have in the last decade or so. Highways have severe impact. Interstate 8 north of the Mexican border, east of Jacumba, has taken quite a toll on bighorn in the last 50 years. That Interstate 8 has been a large separated freeway. We have animals killed on Montezuma Grade, Yaqui Pass, Highway 78 at the Narrows. And one great solution is the establishment of wildlife overpasses. These overpasses, such as this one on Highway 93 in western Arizona, have proven to be very, very successful. Arizona Game and Fish and Arizona Department of Transportation worked together to establish these 3 bridges in areas where radio telemetry told them bighorn were crossing the freeways, and they were causing a great number of collisions between wildlife and automobiles. So they built 3 of these, and they set them up with surveillance cameras. And in the first 20 months, they discovered about 2,100 crossings by bighorn sheep on the overpasses. And this has almost entirely alleviated bighorn versus vehicle accidents. So it's actually saved human lives. It's saved bighorn lives. And you'll see this more and more in the large infrastructure bill that was recently passed in Congress. There are millions of dollars set aside for wildlife overpasses throughout the western United States. So we've had grizzly bears, gray wolves, moose, bighorn, pronghorn, mule deer, white-tailed deer, elk, all using wildlife overpasses. And it's really going to be a trend in the future. They're very expensive, but in my opinion, they're worth it. Some other threats that bighorn face are attractive nuisances such as golf courses, city parks, greenery around homes at the edge of bighorn habitat. This happens to be Hemingway Park in Boulder City, Nevada, which hosts a population of up to 75 bighorn on a daily basis during the summertime. Now, this might look okay, but there's any number of threats and dangers that a place like this poses to bighorn health. One of them is disease, concentrating 75 bighorn in one spot. If somebody has a respiratory ailment, then it's likely that everybody's going to have it. There are parasites that can live in that grass that cannot survive out on the dry, rocky terrain you see in the background. So we've had bighorn die of strongyle parasites.
both there and here in California. Poisonous plants, oleanders, things like that. Going to and from these places, they're often struck by automobiles and killed. We've had them strangle on wires, drown in pools. Nothing good really happens in a place like that. In our local area, the De Anza Country Club is an attractive nuisance. Just about 3 days ago, there were 40 bighorn sheep on the golf course and in the yards adjacent to the state park. The rocky hillside is Anza-Borrego State Park. The oleanders, the palms, are part of a condo complex. And we have proposed building a fence that would exclude bighorn sheep from getting onto the condo property and the golf course. And state government and volunteers have met resistance from the condo HOA. They like the sheep. They think they're their sheep. They think that the bighorn can't survive without their grass and oleanders and swimming pools and all that. But one leaf from one of those oleanders right there can spell death to a bighorn sheep. So there's kind of been a lack of government willpower in pushing this issue. And I look forward to the day that a large, like 6 foot tall fence is built to exclude the bighorn from coming down anymore. Research continues. California Department of Fish and Wildlife, working with U.S. Fish and Wildlife and the Bighorn Institute and State Park, other organizations are still working to capture bighorn, take disease samples, find out what is going on with the respiratory problems. They can track these animals through the use of radio telemetry. I have a collar here I'll show you in a minute. And they also have satellite collars, which can track the bighorn movement via satellite. And some can track the animal in real time and transfer the information down to a researcher's computer. So all these efforts hopefully will have a great payoff in the future, that the bighorn population, which we found was at an all-time low back in the mid-90s, has now rebounded, has gone from about 280 animals in the peninsular mountain range here in Southern California to now around 750 to 800 animals. And population counts by air and by ground continue. And we're hoping that the habitat can be held in a healthy state and rehabilitated, that water can be reestablished, exotic animals and plants can continue to be removed, that people like you become more and more informed about our local wildlife throughout the West, and can be guardians and can be informed voters and can intercede with government officials at public meetings and with Congress to do the right thing to safeguard our wildlife. It's truly, an honor to have worked with bighorn for over 50 years now. I was introduced to bighorn by a state park ranger when I was 11 years old. I became enthralled. It took me 5 years to see my first one, and I will never forget the excitement of that. And now here I am, 55 years later, still enthralled by bighorn. I still get really excited every time I see one. And I hope you do too. And if you haven't seen one yet, I hope you soon will. The book that we put out has about 200 photos in it, and each one has a caption that I hope you find informative. And it describes what each photo is showing, the age of the sheep, the sex of the sheep, where they are. And So if you just like to look at pictures, the book is very worthwhile. Of course, the writing is superb, so I would recommend you read it too. And thank you very much for sharing your day. It's been an honor to be invited down to Sunbelt here in El Cajon, and I hope we have some questions, and that technically I'm able to connect with you and hear your questions and be able to answer them. Thank you very much.
Mark, thank you. That was absolutely superb, really great. And I'm going to have some questions that I'm going to bring into you can answer. Mark, we do have one question. Somebody wants to know about that bighorn sheep skull you have behind you. Can you tell us a little bit about it, like how much it weighs and how you obtained it?
Be happy to. I have two of them. The first is a female, and as we said, both sexes have horns. You can see that the horn is a sheath. It's made up the same material as your fingernails and your toenails. And then the inner core of the horn is actually part of the skull. And this is a very intricately engineered bone structure so it can withstand high impact. And then the ram skull, this guy weighs about 30 pounds. And this animal was about 10 years old. And we actually attached a radio collar to him, and I'll show you that in a minute. And so we caught him with a net gun from a helicopter, and the net was put over him, and I was able to go wrestle with him. He weighed about as much as I did, about 225 pounds at the time. And we went back and forth into the agaves and back out, and was able to get a blindfold on him and put this radio telemetry collar on it. So this collar has a battery pack, has an antenna. It's put snugly around his neck, not too snugly and not too loose, so it doesn't cause problems. But then we were able to track this guy for the next 2 years of his life. The only reason we put a collar on this big ram was because he was so large. And we feared that because he was such a huge one, that somebody might be thinking about poaching him. He measures out at about 41 inches from the base of his horn out to the tip. And this makes him one of the largest bighorn sheep ever found in North America. There are only about probably 25 ever discovered and actually measured that are larger than this guy. So we were able to track him from where he was captured down in Carrizo Gorge at the south end of Anza-Borrego. He made his way 75 miles up past the visitor center, Borrego Palm Canyon, Coyote Canyon, and he ended up way out in the Santa Rosa Mountains. And they make these long forays during the mating season, going from one mountain range to another. And this genetically is excellent because it kind of does away with inbreeding, where if a ram stayed in his home range where he was born, he would be breeding animals he was related to. So in that the rams go out and move and make these long range moves during the breeding season, it provides for genetic diversity.
One other question, one last question about horses. In Anza-Borrego State Park, there were horses up in Coyote Canyon, and they had to be taken out because there was a problem with bighorn sheep. Can you kind of explain what that problem was?
Okay. There's several aspects of that, and it was very controversial, and we were not very popular with horse groups and with some animal rights groups. But at the time, I owned 13 horses of my own, so I wasn't anti-horse. I still have 4. I am an equestrian. I'm pro-horse. But the origin of those horses came in World War II when a local rancher at the town of Anza was going to be deployed to Europe to fight the war. He had 6 horses and he could not find anybody who would accept them. Times were hard, feed was hard to get, people were not well off. He took them over to Coyote Canyon and he released them all. And after the war, he came back. The report was there was 11 of them, and 10 years later, 16. By the time we started really keeping an eye on this horse population, it ranged from 30 to 40 animals. In 2002, there was a severe drought, and we had a PhD student conducting research on the interactions of bighorn sheep and wild horses, feral horses. And she came out of the canyon with some very alarming photographs of these animals in really dire health, and hip bones and ribs very exposed from weight loss during the drought. They were spending most of their time in Coyote Creek at Middle Willows and Upper Willows at the time. So you can imagine their impact on the stream environment, on the vegetation, on amphibians, nesting birds, and then their interactions with bighorn sheep. And the PhD dissertation found that bighorn would avoid areas where the horses were down at water, so it could impact their regular movements. We used a panel of experts that we flew in, including Joan Embry from the San Diego Zoo and 2 professional horse vets. And they determined that this population of horses was in extremely poor health. They told us, park officials at the time, if this was a private ranch, we'd have you arrested for animal cruelty. So we did capture all those horses in one day. There were 34 when we began looking at the operation in the drought in the summer. By the time we captured them in March of 2003, there were only 29 left. All the young foals of the year had died. 21 of those animals were females and foals, and we were very fortunate to be able to have those animals accepted at the Black Hills Wild Horse Sanctuary in South Dakota, where they took up residency and they thrived. The first summer, they gained about 200 pounds each. That tells you how drawn down these animals were. The 8 stallions went to the Bureau of Land Management, and 4 of them were adopted by local horse enthusiasts up around Lake Henshaw. So in our opinion, removing the horses was best for the environment, not just bighorn sheep, but the entire park and riparian environment. And it was also the best thing for the horses.
Thank you very much, Mark. And I just want to thank you very much for being our guest today. We did have a few quick questions coming here at the end. Perhaps after I tell you a little bit more about the sale that we have on the book here, I can run into Mark's office there and ask him for a final question. But I do want to remind everybody that the Desert Bighorn Sheep, check our website, is on discount for all those who are watching the Sunbelt Spotlight today. And I do want to remind you that there'll be another spotlight in January, on January the 4th. And the speaker will be none other than myself, talking about Ghost Mountain, Marshall South and the Ghost Mountain Chronicles. So do join us on January the 4th, 11 o'clock, and I will be talking about the Desert Bighorn Sheep. I'm going to run back into Mark's office for a couple of the last questions that he can go ahead, and then we'll sign off. So hang on there. Mark, we had a real quick question. Somebody wanted an update on the Bighorn Sheep in Baja.
Bighorn sheep in Baja, one more question. There are 2 different subspecies, one in southern Baja called the Weems bighorn sheep, and the peninsular bighorn sheep, the Cremnobates, in northern Baja. And surveys conducted over the last 15 or 20 years show that the population of bighorn sheep in Baja has been stable. They've been reintroduced into some locations. A wealthy business person in Mexico actually purchased an island in the Gulf in the Sea of Cortez, and the island was cleared of goats and fishing camps, and it was used to reestablish bighorn sheep from the Baja Peninsula area. And last count, there were anywhere between 300 and 500 bighorn on that island, and they're used as a source to restock the mountain ranges in southern Baja, like the Sierra Gigante. There's hunting that is allowed in several Mexican states. It's not allowed in Baja California, the north, what we used to call Baja Norte, now it's called Baja California. There's been a moratorium on hunting there, but Baja Sur does have a successful hunting program, which whether you're a pro hunter or not, hunting programs in Mexico, if they're well regulated, bring a lot of revenue in and help actually fund the recovery. If it wasn't for those hunting programs, there'd probably be no sheep in Texas, Chihuahua, Coahuila, or Nuevo Leon. And they have to be well regulated, and you have to keep corruption and graft out of the programs. But overall, Baja is thought to be doing quite well with bighorn.
Thank you again, Mark, and thank you once again for being a guest on our spotlight featuring you today. And want to thank you, and please join us next January or in January for a talk on Marshall South. Goodbye, everybody.
Thank you all.